Hello, and today's session is all about networking, but specifically networking if you're an introvert. So with me today is Coach Jorge Mascarenhas of jorgemascarenhas.com. And George has worked with executives, with entrepreneurs, and the majority of them are sitting somewhere on the introversion scale. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I think it's funny that a lot of people think of executives and people who are out there as being extroverts, but actually a lot of them are deep introverts, and they
Mm,
just found a way to manage that and behave in the way that we see them.
yeah.
But I come across a lot of people still feeling, a bit jittery about being out there.
Yeah, yeah. So we're going to talk about that today, about networking if you're an introvert. And so, I mean, networking is another way to reach out and find out what jobs are around, what companies are hiring. But also, actually, if you are considering starting your own business, networking is a vital step in, actually making connections and building your reach, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I find sometimes people think of networking as kind of a big thing. Networking, what's that thing? That thing that makes me cringe and so on. But if you think about the word networking, it's just really about joining dots, isn't it? It's about connecting. And that's what I usually talk about. It's about relationships and connecting with people. Networking is not about going to a big event and trying to show business cards. And actually, I wouldn't advise anyone to do that, to be
Yeah.
fair. It's really about seeking connection. And then through connection, actually opening possibilities, whatever they might be. It might be that it's about jobs. It might be, like you said, about building a business and getting some support in doing so, or just getting some fandom, some fans to support you along the way. Can it be about all those things?
So, do you have a strategy, a networking strategy that you teach your clients?
Well, I have a lot of different concepts, I suppose, and,
Mm,
and, and strategies. Um, the first thing, and if we're thinking about introverts mainly, is I like to start with the mindset of networking, what it is and what it is not. And we talked about what it is a little bit, but I like to discuss a little bit about the mindset. And I find a lot of people, when they network, they have what I call a taking away or takeaway mindset, versus a giving mindset. And what I mean by that is most people, especially if they're introverts, when they go and network, they feel like they're taking something away from that person, either the time, effort, energy, whatever. They always have this assumption that, oh, I'm kind of
mm.
making use of your time. I'm sorry for that. And that makes them be very apologetic about it. Whereas if you're able to have a giving mentality, which is one where you might be able to give something back, it might be information, it might be knowledge, it might be just the connection, it might be your help or support. If, like myself, you're a coach, it might be that you can coach the person. So that mentality around giving and going in knowing that when you're having a connection, you might be taking something, but you're also giving something. So it's an exchange, and it's an equal exchange. And I find that that's usually the starting point. People go in having this takeaway mentality, and therefore they come up, or they show up in a weaker position, and therefore they just don't show up in the best way that they could.
Yeah.
So that's probably the first starting point. But yeah, I guess your question is more around strategies that are, I guess, more practical. And one of the things that I like to talk about is the colors of networking.
Mm,
And I think we've talked about this you and me before. I like to look at two colors. One is the green color, and I usually call green people, to the concept of people in our circles who are very well connected. So green people as opposed to red people. Red people are the people that you talk to and nothing else happens because they're not very well connected. But the green people are those hubs that have loads of spokes around them. And when
mm.
you speak to them, when you connect to them, that can open up possibilities because they know other people that you might be able to speak to. So one strategy might be identify the green people in your network and reach out to them with whatever it is that you want to reach out. It might be asking for support around your business. It might be thinking about career or just getting some thoughts. The second color I like to talk about is the color gold or golden. And it's about asking the golden questions. So to me, golden questions are questions that open up possibilities and open up your network. So if you identify the green people, the next step when you connect with them and when you feel appropriate, is asking a question that is a golden question. Something like, who in your network should I meet? Who would benefit from a conversation with me? Who might be in a position that might allow me to discuss something that's interesting? So questions that allow the people that you meet to open up yet another connection for you.
So it's not a dead
Like,
end. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So that's not a dead end. So I always say that a lot of people say, well, I don't know how to network and my network is very small. I actually don't have a network. And I always get a little bit, that's not true, because we all have, we all have family, friends, we have former colleagues. We might not see them as networks or as networking efforts because they feel too close to home. The truth is, people around us will know people in businesses, people that started their businesses, people who have information or knowledge. And we can only get there if we start sharing our story, what we are about, and starting talking to people. And then, making use of these two strategies, these two colors, it can open up, you multiply our network. And actually, all we need is probably half a dozen people, but we can get really far. And we talk about that everyone is connected by 6 or 7 degrees,
Yeah.
isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
And it's a little bit that principle. And it's not about mass emailing people. It's about connecting one person at a time. And then once we establish that connection, that person will be more willing to help you as well. So when you ask them, who might I be able to meet that they know someone will come to their mind and they will be, keen to make that introduction.
Yeah, I know. And in psychology, I often come across the idea of loose connections and how they can be more helpful than your closer ones. But you can only reach your loose connections through your closer ones in the first place, can't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So loose connections would be people that, are attached or connected to somebody that that's connected to somebody that you know. Yeah.
exactly. And that's there's something about the temperature of networking as well. So warm connections are always more effective and more useful than cold connections. So if you reach out to someone cold, chances are there's no connection whatsoever. They might even be slightly defensive. Whereas a warm connection, someone who is introduced by someone who you mutually know, will be much more eager to support you if what you're asking for is support, but will be much more keen to connect you. And again, as a little tip, I usually tell people, if you know of someone who you'd like to get to know and there's someone in common, don't go to that person and say, we have this person in common, let's chat. Ask your friends to introduce you. Because for that third person, the incentive to respond is much higher if their friend is the one taking the initiative, because they're not going to let their friend kind of, their email or their connection or message go into the empty. They will, feel keen to respond. Whereas if you are the one initiating it, they don't know you.
Yeah.
They don't have necessarily an incentive, or they might have a less incentive to respond. So again, using your network in that sense, and when I say using, it sounds a little bit bad, but it's not using in the sense that let me make use of you, but it's getting people who know you and who perhaps are fans of yours and who know how great of a person you are to connect you with someone else. Because if they are within your circle, by definition, they should be your fans. So they are rooting for you. So when you ask them, would you introduce me? Why would they not?
Yeah. And this applies whether it's in person or online via LinkedIn, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely. I mean, I've connected, and I've been connected many times through LinkedIn, my friends, and just saying the little story, here's someone who is, doing this and that. I thought it would be good for you to connect, and you can connect. So the real versus virtual world is, in a way, a slightly funny distinction. I get a lot of people saying, well, now we're in this pandemic, I can't even go for coffee and have a natural conversation. Or how do I do that? You just mentioned one way, you can do that through LinkedIn. But I always say that, we are, and we've heard in the news, we are in this together, right? And what to me, what that means is that we are indeed going through this all at the same time. It's not like some people, those people who are out of a job, are now going through that alone. No, everyone is going through this at the same time. And that makes a brilliant excuse to reach out to people and have a virtual conversation, a virtual coffee. And I know people have adapted even the language. It's a virtual coffee, it's a virtual lunch, and people make 15 minutes where they might actually having a drink and they're talking. Because I think during these times, people get it because we are in the same position. All of us might feel, I don't know, a little bit more isolated than usual because we're not having our social lives in the way that it used to be. So when people invite us for a virtual conversation, it doesn't sound awkward because we're all in the same boat.
Yeah.
So I think there's something about overcoming that barrier of, oh my God, now I have to do this virtually. It's really awkward. I don't know how to position it. Well, what if everyone is thinking the same?
Mm. Mm.
That might change things. And I've had clients do that and work really well, and even doing things like brown bag lunches and things like that usually are done in person, now being done virtually and working quite well because everyone gets it. It's just how the world is working at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose another thing to point out is that when you're reaching out to these people, you're not necessarily asking them for a job, are you? You could be asking them for advice about an industry or, ideas, or, I've even heard of people approaching people to ask them for if they can shadow or have, chats with them about what they do in the day.
Absolutely. I think that's a brilliant point. And if anything, I would actually advise people not to reach out asking for a job.
Mm.
Because when you do that, the natural reaction is, there's only two scenarios. Either that person might know of any opportunities or not. The chances of them knowing any opportunities that actually fit you are pretty slim. If that person doesn't know any opportunities, the chances that they're going to respond are pretty slim because now they know they have nothing to offer you. So for them, it's going to be a very difficult conversation. It's going to be awkward. They're going to say, well, I can talk to you, but I don't have anything. It's not a nice feeling for them. So I think, as you pointed out, I think the trick is reaching out not to ask for the job, but asking in a way that can put that person in a position where they can actually do something, potentially to help or share, which makes them feel good. I usually talk about playing to the ego, and I don't mean that in a nasty way. It just means that when we are asked for help, we often feel pretty good when we can help someone.
Mm.
When someone reaches out to us saying, you know what, you have a really interesting career, I'd love to hear how you made certain decisions, I would feel good about that and sharing my story. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
So I would advise people, as you say, to reach out to people much more with curiosity about the path that I have taken. It might be that if you're looking for a job in finance, go and find out people who have had a certain path in finance that sounds appealing to you and reach out and ask them, how have you made the decisions that you've made? I'm interested in getting to something similar, but I'd love to understand your journey. How
Mm.
was it for you? What challenges did you face? How did you overcome them? That will give you a lot of information, but also will make the other person feel good about themselves. So the chances of them responding and being willing to spend 15 minutes are much higher than if you just go, here, I'm an accountant, do you have an accounting job?
Yeah.
That's a much colder approach. So you talked about shadowing, you talked about asking for advice. I think mentoring is a brilliant thing to ask for
Yeah.
during these times as well.
Forgot
And
that.
again, when you ask to mentor someone, usually you feel pretty good about that. It's someone that is there valuing you as a person and valuing your experience. That's a great feeling. But what I find is, especially introverts, is that they worry about reaching out and asking for mentorship because, again, they feel like they're taking away the time from that person. And I always say, well, what if by reaching out and asking for a mentor, you're actually making that person feel pretty good about themselves? And it might be that you are also giving something back, maybe some knowledge that you have, some information, some experiences that we have.
Mm.
Because we're all unique. We all have something that we can share from a kind of experience and information perspective. So yes, coming back, don't reach out asking for a job. Reach out asking either for information, either for mentoring or shadowing, like you said, for support potentially, and asking for help is a nice way. And asking for help doesn't mean I want your help to get a job. It might be, I'd like your help to understand how does that industry work.
Mm.
I want to move to that industry. I know a little bit, but I don't know the ins and outs. I would love to know a little bit more about the industry, and you are an expert.
Yeah.
So that understanding, that curiosity, I think curiosity is really important when you're trying to network. Because also at the other end is a human being. If you're being curious about that person, again, you'll make that person feel good about themselves and they'll be engaged. Whereas if they feel like you have a very clear agenda of you're trying to reach out to me because you want me to get you a job, that is a bit off-putting.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So one thing we haven't mentioned is that you have a background in headhunting, haven't you?
Yes, I do.
So, I mean, obviously, the things we haven't talked about today are actually applying for jobs and, approaching recruiters and things. So where do you see networking fitting in with the overall strategy? And do you have any tips that we haven't touched upon?
Yeah, I would say that most headhunters will tell you that the majority of people will find jobs through networking rather than responding to job posts. And again, it has to do with the warmth of the
Mhm.
relationship. And it's very simple. If you're networking and someone recommends you, then there's already someone vouching for you. Whereas if you reply to a online advertisement, that person doesn't know anything about you. It's quite cold. And unless your CV looks like it matched perfectly that job, it's going to be hard. The other thing I would say about job hunting and networking is that through networking, you might be able to create possibilities that didn't exist before. And I've seen that time and time again. People who are great people, once they get in front of someone, they can discuss things. And actually, they can carve out jobs that didn't exist. But
Mm.
because now they're there with their expertise and with their perspective, they can actually highlight to a potential recruiter that there's a job that they could do. I actually have an example very close to home that happened exactly with my wife, where she networked and actually a recruiter put her in touch with someone, but it was more of an introduction. And once they started talking, they realized that with all the expertise she had, there should be a job for her, although it hadn't been advertised and they hadn't thought
Yeah.
about it. And she actually started a couple of weeks ago,
Yeah.
and that's how she got her
Yeah.
new job, which is for her a dream job.
Yeah.
Why? Because she was able to carve it out with someone else.
Mm.
So the chances of you getting your ideal job are much higher than if you're looking from a menu of stuff that has already been done for you.
Yeah.
So I think networking is an essential part of it. Another reason for that is I find that people often spend a lot of time doing their CV before they go out and reach out. And I think that's a mistake, because when you network, people will be asking you questions, who are you? Tell me
Mm.
about you, and so on. And the more you talk about it, the sharper your story becomes. And as people start asking you questions, you'll realize what are the bits of your background that are not clear enough. And that informs how you might do your CV. Now, obviously, it's nice to have a CV to start with because it might be a connection tool, especially if you're reaching out to recruiters. But I wouldn't spend like loads of time in a CV before reaching out. Even when reaching out to recruiters, I would ask them, what do you think of my CV? Is there anything that I should change that is not really coming across on the back of the conversation we just had?
Yeah.
So I think most people kind of get a little bit backwards, which is let me do my CV, then let me look online at what exists, let me ping my CV. I would do the other way around, is try to start having conversations first and let those conversations inform how you do your CV, even how you adjust your strategy. Because on the back of the conversation, someone might say, you know what, maybe you should look into this area. And maybe that's something that you haven't thought about before. And you wouldn't have known if you had spent days and days behind a laptop just applying for jobs online, because nobody would have told you that. So I would say, kind of going back to your question, networking should be, and I know it might sound a little bit drastic, but it should be at least 80% of your job search.
Wow. Okay. So you've touched upon the people who are hiding behind their laptops working on their CVs, and I know as an introvert myself, and I know many of them, that is a nice, comfortable place to
It is.
be. So let's talk about the whole introversion thing, because introversion is about energy, isn't it? And it's about
Yes.
where you get your energy from. And as introverts, we tend to need to withdraw now and again to replenish that energy. So what's your advice and thoughts around that?
Yeah, and I think you made it, and you clarified very well. Introversion, sometimes people think of introversion as, oh, I just want to be here in my shell and don't want to do anything. That's not introversion. Introversion is about, exactly as you say, where do you get your energy from? Is it from having time on your own and having maybe connections one-on-one, or is it being around a group of people? So, and obviously there's degrees of introversion. There's people who are extremely introverted and less. So this is a bit of a generalization. But if you're an introvert and you prefer the comfort of having a kind of one-on-one conversation rather than kind of being exposing yourself, again, back to the networking, if you start with your inner circles, which are comfortable, start with your friends and your colleagues, these are people who know you. So by the very definition, they support you. They know how great you are. When you reach out to them and tell them what you are about, what are the things that you're trying to learn, where do you want to go next, their chances are they will be supportive. And again, if you get warm introductions, that's an easier step and a smaller step, rather than then picking up the phone and calling a recruiter and say, here I am, help me out. So for me, as an introvert, and I'm an introvert myself, it's all about one-on-one connection and going small steps. So I dread the idea of sending a cold email to anyone.
Yeah.
But I'm okay with reaching out to a friend of mine and say, look, I'm trying to find out a bit more about this industry. Is there anyone in your network who works there and knows about it that I could, reach out to? And could you put me in touch with them? So a friend of mine would obviously be rooting for me. So if they say yes and they introduce me to someone, again, because it will be a friend of mine, chances are from a personality perspective, we might actually connect quite well as well.
Yeah, there is that. Yeah.
In headhunting, there's a saying that we often use, which says, good people know good people. And what that means is that when I was recruiting, instead of going on LinkedIn, the first thing I would do, if I needed, let's say, a CMO for a business, I would call the good CEOs that I knew and ask them, who's the best CMO you know? Because if I knew a good CEO, surely the people that he would recommend would be good people. And I like to adopt that as well, which is, good people know good people, in the sense that my friends and my connections that I deem to be good, because we have some affinity, will know people who perhaps would have affinity with them as well. And therefore, we might have some affinity as well indirectly. And that makes it slightly easier for me to have a conversation with them. Chances are they're not going to be completely at the opposite spectrum than I am from a personality, because they're a friend of a friend. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
in terms
definitely.
of
It does. Yeah.
That's my adjustment of good people know good people, is looking at it from an affinity perspective and from a relational perspective.
It's quite reassuring as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I always say to people, don't do stuff that makes you uncomfortable, because if you do stuff that makes you uncomfortable, it will come across.
Yeah.
So remember, at the end of the day, you are your brand, right? The way in which you present yourself generates emotions and feelings in other people. So if you're doing something out of discomfort, people will feel it. And they're not going to have that emotional connection that you want them to have with you. So always try to find the most comfortable path to your goal, because people will feel that as well. So if I'm speaking to a friend of a friend, I'll probably be speaking, it's not going to be completely easy, but it's not going to be uncomfortable either. And therefore, I can show up, in a nice, pleasant, friendly way and with energy as well. And therefore, my chances of success are higher. And success might mean a number of things. Again, it might be learning. It might be getting another connection. It might be getting a job. It might be being on someone's radar for later. So there's another idea, which is job hunting. And I know it's something that people don't really want to hear, especially if they're out of a job, but it can be a long game, or at least it should be played in the long run. For people who are networking now for job hunting, another piece of advice I have for them is keep the connections that they make. So, if you're connecting to headhunters and recruiters and so on, put a note in your diary to reach out to them again in 3 months' time or 6 months' time. Even if you found a job, just give them an update and say, oh, I just wanted to let you know, I'm now doing this. And keep that connection going. Even if it's just a couple of times a year, that's fine. Because when you need again, the connection will be warm. You're not going to start all over again.
Yeah, that's good advice. And it's interesting because years ago, when in my early 20s, I went for a job interview with a lady called Rosalind Palmer, who ran Rosalind Palmer PR. I didn't get the job, but we really liked each other. So we just kept in touch over the years. And I've interviewed her for various things, and she's actually done an interview for the Hub. She's now a therapist and does an interview about anger after redundancy, and that's, I don't know, 20 odd years later.
Yeah.
So the connections, we speak, a couple of times a year, it's still going strong. So yeah, I'm really behind you on that.
Yeah, exactly that. I'm still in touch with some of the recruiters who have placed me during my corporate career years ago. And I've never wanted anything back from them, but it's just some of them are really nice people. And I just like to check in on them. And if I can help them later on, because that's another thing that people don't think too much, is that when they reach out to recruiters, they go, okay, again, it's the taking mentality versus the giving mentality. I don't want a job. They know I want a job, therefore I'm in a weaker position. What some people don't know is that recruiters actually thrive on information, on inside information. What I mean by that is, if you know a certain industry or a certain company, you will have inside information that they don't have because they don't work there. Recruiters rely, in the same way that I told you good people know good people, and I used to call people to ask for recommendations. Recruiters, and that happens to me, they call me all the time asking, who do you know who works in this area? That's very valuable information to them. So if people work in a specific sector, when they reach out to recruiters, they can make the offer as well to say, look, I know this area very well. If there's anyone that you want to know about, or any segment that you'd like to learn more about, or any company that I've been into, let's have a conversation. Very happy to share with you. That is extremely valuable to recruiters. And there's very few people who make that offer to recruiters. When I was a recruiter, the people who made that offer to me, I stayed in touch with them for a long time, because they would perhaps say, reach out whenever you want me, just to check something with me. I'm very happy to do that for you. That's actually very valuable, because then when I go to my client, I have information about that company or the culture. And that's really valuable, because I've never worked there, I wouldn't know. But if I have a few inside people who can give me that, when I'm talking to the client, I can say, oh, you know what? The fit here might not work so well because that company tends to have this sort of culture. That makes me look really good in front of a client. So for job hunters, again, remember that they can have a lot to give to recruiters as well. So play on that.
That's really good advice, and I've never heard that before. That's a gem.
From someone who has been in that place. Yeah. So if you haven't been a recruiter, you probably wouldn't know this, but it's very valuable. And I have used that a few times. People who have been very generous, obviously I help them. They've been generous in giving back as well. And that made me look very good in front of clients, because I had inside information about the number of companies and their culture. And what I mean inside information is not anything negative. It's just about knowing what's the specificity of the culture. Because we all know, fit depends a lot on culture, and that's very important. And just knowing the nuances can be very important.
Yeah. Even just knowing that, this is a come in early, leave late culture, and some people might not like that. That's really interesting. All of it's been really interesting, and it strikes me that what you mentioned about green people, like part of this exercise is almost to become greener, isn't it? To become one of those green people yourself.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, you don't need necessarily to grow a massive network for you to become a green person, but you can behave like one, in the sense of, even being an introvert, you can be willing to connect people and help people. If you have that mindset of helping people and connecting people, you will just be opening up possibilities for you. Maybe not even the short term, but maybe in the long run. So yes, I think there's something about becoming a green person. I just want to make that distinction, because people might think, well, I'm an introvert, I don't want to have a huge network. It's not about that. It's about the mindset of being able to connect people if it makes sense in a friendly way.
Yeah. Excellent. Very wise words. Well, thank you for today.
My pleasure.
So all Jorge's information is going to be below the video here, and the link through to the website and so on. So thank you once again.
My pleasure.